Hello and welcome to this short video about another HR assignment. This one you'll be pleased to know you're doing two assignments at once. So the units are BSBHRM404, which is Review Human Resource Functions, and the also BSBHRM401, which is Analyse and Present Research Information. Now the reason you can do two at once basically is because the HR unit requires a report, and the report requires some research, and you'll probably realise that those words appear in the other unit name as well. So by doing a little bit extra, only a very small amount, we can actually achieve both units at the same time. So that's good news. So the assignment is set up in the usual way. Two basic tasks. One task is the knowledge-based questions, so it proves the knowledge evidence against both units. And then the second task is the research project, which in this case will be researching, analysing and putting a report together about HR functions. So I should say this HR functions unit really is the basic unit for HR, because it gets you to look at all of the functions that are provided within an organisation. And sometimes they're not provided by HR people. Small businesses don't have necessarily HR dedicated staff. So if you're doing your research within a small business, don't just look for HR people. You'll need to look for all of the functions that are provided by the business that are HR related. So in a large organisation it's easier, obviously. It's at least to identify the functions, because HR normally have them all under their umbrella, but not always. So that's just a little note of caution. The other note, I suppose, is when you put this information together, especially if you're using an organisation you don't belong to, but also including one that you do belong to, just be cautious about confidentiality and privacy. You may be accessing information if you're asking advice or for information from particular officers within the business, that you'd be expected to keep that confidential. So that's fairly important in all HR roles and also in this assignment. Okay, so let's look at the first task then. This is the written questions task. It's on page 12 of the assessment package. Hopefully you've got that already, and you've probably gone to the website to see the access to this video, but all the other documentation that's available there too. So the first question is list and briefly describe, did I say listly? Anyway, list and briefly describe the relevant legislation that applies to human resources in Tasmania. So a quick look at legislation in business.gov or any other place will give you that. You've looked at these things in other assignments, so you can copy and paste if you wish. And I'm saying here, consider at least work health and safety, workers' compensation, privacy, anti-discrimination and fair work as a minimum for these legislations that may apply to HR. So it's only brief, remember. I don't need a whole composition of what's in each act or anything, just the things that it's intended to cover. Question number 2, then briefly describe HR relevant policies and frameworks that support business practices. So we're looking for the policies and procedures basically, and maybe code of conduct, stuff like that, that support the HR functions within the business. So it's just a very brief description. The next one, briefly describe the various HR roles and or responsibilities that are needed to support business outcomes and compliance. Okay, so this is a bit of a follow-on from the previous question, isn't it, where we asked about what policies, procedures and stuff are in place, but this time, which of the roles within the business are responsible for that. So remember, they may not be HR people, they could be a general manager, admin officer, all sorts of people have various roles within HR. Okay, next one. Explain how information technology can help analyse human resource metrics. So when we say metrics, it's just things you can measure, such as absenteeism, workers' compensation, allowance and pay costs, etc. So some organisations have a human resource information management system. Green Tree and a few others are like that. There's lots of them around, but not many businesses actually have them that cover their whole HR gambit. So we're just looking for how we could use spreadsheets, other bits of software that might help measure these things and report on them. That's all we're looking at, okay? Then, number 5, summarise relevant ethical practices that support HR delivery. Include security of information and records in your answer. So, ethical practices is quite a wide topic, but I'm asking you to at least consider the privacy aspects of HR, which I addressed sort of at the beginning of this video as well. But ethical practices, so there's a few things on the net that I've put there about ethics in general, ethics in HR in particular. Some example code of ethics from I think the Computer Society that just shows you there's a hell of a lot more to ethics than just being honest and have integrity. It's about professional practice basically, so I need you to look at that and try and identify the areas that relate to HR in particular. And then we go on to a couple of questions relating to the research part of the assignment. So this is explain the concepts related to research and analysis, including reliability and validity and the identification of sources of information. These could be online and print. Include discussion on how to ensure gathering information is both effective and efficient. So when you start to research and decide which research questions you're going to answer in your assignment, I need you to think about what sort of analysis you might do. How would you make sure the information you get is valid and is it reliable? So usually if you're using the web, that means using a government website, so a .gov.au type thing, or at least an edu type website, so that means it's an educational institution such as a university or even TAFE. But be wary of the ones that are .org, because they are community groups generally, but they still can be authoritative, such as they're not. .net or .com for sure, because usually a business interest in those ones, so you can't be sure that the data is reliable. So we're looking at that. You'll find on the net I've put up a little summary of research and report writing, which pretty covers the whole process and includes some of these considerations. So have a look at that, that'll help you with your answer there. Number 7, list at least 3 examples of techniques for data analysis and briefly discuss how they are applied. So once again, I'll refer you to that little handout that I've put on the web there, but you may have a workbook that covers these things in great depth, but there'll be enough just in that little handout. The most common data analysis we'll use is probably comparative analysis. So if you're putting a report together, it might be to do with benchmarking, or sometimes if you're looking at a product or a service, it's looking at all the major features that you want and maybe the costs as well from that product or service, and then comparing them usually in a table where you can easily see where one outperforms the other and you can make the relevant recommendation. But there are other ones that you'll see in the notes there, so I'm after 3 different sorts. Okay, so that's the written questions, at least describing them. Takes a bit longer to answer them, of course, so wish you luck with that. And then the other task here is a research project, so it's actually putting together a report and answering these questions or these tasks as you put it together. Now on the net you'll find down here where the assignment is, there's a sample student work. Fortunately this person has been generous enough to allow us to use her work. I've taken the name out of all of the information, but it's a pretty good way to show you what's expected and how the report should look. There's a lot of ticks on there because it's actually my feedback to this person, but it'll give you a reasonable guide. She works for a large organisation, so your assignment may not have as much detail in it as she's done, but hopefully you'll find it as a reasonable guide. Okay, so the beginning of this report is to look at a summary of all of the HR functions that are provided within an organisation that you have selected, so maybe the one you work for or one you've got access to. If you need help actually getting access to an organisation, for me to assure that if it's about student work and you're not there to steal secrets or anything, I'm happy to support that, just let me know. And you may have covered some of that question already in the theory part, in the written questions in the previous task. So you can copy and paste that if you wish. The next one is briefly describe how the following 3 functions are processed within the organisation. So you have to do these 3. Later on you'll be asked to select whatever you want, but you have to do these 3. So I want a summary of how these functions are used within your organisation. So processing leave, so that's not just recreation leave, that's sick leave, compassionate leave, maybe jury or community service leave, maternity leave, those sort of things. So just a brief way of how it's done, so that I can see how, or if you were in an HR role, you'd know how to institute that procedure. Workers' compensation management, so I need to see there what happens when someone gets injured at work, what process is taken and which parties are involved in getting them back to work. And the last one is performance management. So some of you may have already done an assignment on that. So if that's the case, you can just refer to the work that you've already done in, I think it's HRM403, and I can use that rather than you writing it all out again. So, down to C now. Complete a research plan for a report based on comprehensively researching one of the HR services, either from B, that's the leave processing, workers' comp or performance management, or from the list below. I don't mind what you pick, it's just got to be something that you've got a bit of passion for, I suppose, and you've got access to the information. Or something you're not familiar with at all and you just want to be. Anyway, have a look. So it can be any of those 3, because at the first one you're only talking about that topic in a brief way, just a summary, whereas now I'm asking for a full-blown research into that particular topic. So the other ones listed there you can choose if you wish, and that will be the topic of your research plan. So on the next page it talks about what should be in the research plan. So it's hard to sort of talk about this without showing you, but maybe if you look at the sample work that's been provided, you'll see what was in that person's research plan. It'll help you with yours. So we need to look at the research objectives or questions, and these questions are actually specified later on in the task below. So these are the things I need you to find out about the particular topic you're going to research. So if you look at D now, those items have to be relevant to the policies and procedures, so are they actually relevant to how and do people use them? Consideration of compliance issues, so do they allow the business to comply with work health and safety or other laws or standards? The ethical business requirements, so the ethical standards within the business. And then finally, the ethical obligations and behaviour of HR staff. So that's more particular now, and you would have previously answered some questions about ethics in your other work, so you'll be pretty well set for that, but you'll have to apply it to the particular topic that you're going to research. Okay, so that'll be the basis of your research questions, but you might have more than that depending on what you choose. Going back to C now in that dot point list, a description of the business HR networks that can be accessed at local, state, national and international levels to aid with further research. So we need to look at what HR networks you could access. So the local ones, the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, HR Daily is an email service that has lots of topics that are researched in there. That is a possible way to get information as well. The Fair Work Ombudsman at a national level or state level is also pretty useful. At the international level, we've got the International Labour Organisation. All of these things are actually provided in links within, there's a page there called Other Web Links, I think, for this topic. You can access those and use the hyperlinks and go straight to them, but I need you to think about what sort of HR networks you could be part of to keep up to date with all these sort of things. The next dot point is your research strategies, including plans, sources of information and methods of collecting the information. So research strategy is just another way of saying, okay, how are you going to get the information? Are you going to interview people? Are you going to research best practice on the net? So some of the example websites I've got there are universities who they're happy to make their HR policies and functions public. So you can have a look at those and probably consider them against best practice. Look at the Ombudsman best practice guides, that sort of stuff. Or it could be a combination of those things. So I need to see that in your little research plan as well. So the strategies you're going to use and what the sources of information are that you're going to use. And the sources of relevant workforce data, if that's the case. So we might need to get some data about absenteeism or the number of sick, not sick leave I suppose, because that is absenteeism. Unplanned sick leave is absenteeism. But workers' comp claims, it could be anything. But where could you get that data? And the proposed methods of data analysis. So how are you going to analyse that? And it might be you're going to compare with best practice. That's probably the most usual. And that would become your data analysis technique. But you might have tables of data and look for trends and things like that, so that could be the case too. Okay, so down to D now. I've already mentioned what those things needed to be considered for for the topic you're going to research. But it also says the report must include clear conclusions based on your research findings. So a clear conclusion about your research. What has it led you to know? And then make some recommendations. What would you recommend to improve this situation, to improve that HR practice or function? And finally, feedback and suggestions from a colleague who has reviewed your draft report prior to final publication. So I need to see that someone else, at least somebody else, has looked at your work and given you advice and you've changed the text accordingly. So that's for the report writing unit, we need to see that. In other words, we don't expect people to trot off a report and just send it out. We need to get people to consider what's in it. Even the writing style and stuff like that, it might be helpful to get someone else to give you some feedback. And now the report format, I've got a list here of things that I need to see as a minimum. Create a title page, create a table of contents, create a paragraph heading system for ease of reading and scanning. So if you know Word, you can actually sometimes set up those numerical systems like 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.2.1 if there's sub-points. But I don't mind whatever system you use, as long as, even if they're just headings, and there's bigger headings for the main ones and then smaller headings, as long as it's easy for the reader to be cross-referenced if they need to. Can you paragraph so-and-so within a document, and you can direct people to that. So it's got to be clear and logical. Include an executive summary. So that's just a very short couple of paragraphs normally at the beginning of the report that highlights the major recommendations and the way you found those out, which just saves someone who's very busy just to read that executive summary and they'll know what your report was about and what are the main recommendations. Have an introduction that clearly identifies the issues you're going to look at. Provide an overview of your findings and the main points and supporting arguments in the body of the report. Use graphics where applicable and present data in a way that facilitates ease of understanding. This is important for the reports writing unit part of it. We need to sort of see a table brought in or some graphic that shows information that you're trying to get at. And of course include the recommendations and conclusions and recommendations, and also include references for the information sources. Now, so some of the links I've provided on the web and are also in the assessment package. They'll take you to report writing advice sites for universities and others. There's a referencing one there from UTAS that we're going to look at the Harvard system of referencing. I don't need you to get this exactly right, but I need to make sure you've made an effort to reference all of the things that you found out rather than putting them off as your own view. If you've taken it from somewhere else, please tell me that. Show me where you got it from. And once again, the sample assignment at the end has a pretty good reference list. It shows, if you've used a website, you usually have a little notation on that as when you access the website. It's a good idea if you're doing that, just save the URLs as you go through the websites onto a Word document or something, and then they can just be all put in together at the end as your reference list. But if you've got printed matter or you had an interview with someone, just a note to say the position of the person you interviewed and the time and date that you did that would be part of the references as well. Okay, so it is a bit of work and it is a bit confusing, and I hope this sample assessment will help you sort of work out how you want to format your assignment. I wish you well with it. There are a lot of links on the website. I don't want to overwhelm you with research, but just choose your access to the links, the ones that sort of suit what you want to talk about. Anyway, I guess if you're doing this unit right now, you'll have 6 weeks to finish it, and that's about November the 10th, I think, for 2017. But if you start at a different time, then obviously that deadline won't apply. Okay, have fun with that. See you later.